Hi everyone, this is Marina with How I Got Here, and I have Rabbi Caleb Fischer here as one of my guests. Thank you so much for joining me. We worked together, that's how we met. And we were just, started talking, and I found out that Rabbi Caleb Fischer is actually an ancient Jewish history. You have a master's in ancient Jewish history from the Yeshiva University. So this is the first time I actually hear somebody who has that master's. I think that's awesome. So obviously, because of what's happening in the world today, I'm extremely curious, what is your knowledge about Jesus himself? So thank you so much for joining me. I didn't think you would say yes, but also Rabbi is obsessed with anime. I just have to throw it out there.
Like that, yeah, there's a lot of things I'm familiar with. Got to be a jack of all trades in this world,
I know.
and
That's amazing.
but
Now
yeah,
listen,
history is my thing.
it's really not mine, so this is why you're here. So I'm really honored that you're here. I'm really honored that we have met, and I hope everyone, the audience, can see what an amazing person you are. Just person, period, and then everything else that you have to offer. So, like I said, with everything that's happening today, the world is upside down after October 7th massacre, unfortunately. And I feel like everything, all the information that we hear today, including as weird as hearing Jesus was a Palestinian. I mean, I thought I heard it all, but here we are. Um, let's just start from the history of who was Jesus, where was he born,
Sure.
you know.
It's funny you mentioned about Jesus being Palestinian because I actually had a conversation. Somebody asked me, speaking of anime, the Boondocks, great show from the 2000s. So like, oh, but he said in the show Jesus is Palestinian, and it often comes to like they have to discuss with people like it. The word Palestinian is so charged now where it means a very specific, particularly Arab ethnic identity that it did not refer to, certainly in ancient times and going much farther back, not even talking about modern times where in the 1930s, the Palestinian Post, which was a Jewish paper, Jews were known as Palestinians also. It wasn't exclusive to Arabs or Muslims. But going back thousands of years, the Palestine, the concept was a renaming that only occurred much later of what was ancient Israel and then later Judea and Samaria and the Galilee. It's the whole region is referred to as Palestine. So sometimes we might say, especially in secular history, that we'll talk about, oh, the Jews of Palestine, meaning that ancient area and how it's being called. But to really, I think it's really difficult to talk about the historical Jesus without at least placing the context first. And you understand, like, it's not like Jesus happened and nothing had been going on before. This is something that was a long, there's something that was a long time coming where people were rethinking Judaism in a very stressful situation, maybe not unlike today in some ways. Um, but it really goes back to post-Bible. We're talking about the Jews. They've been exiled from the land of Israel. They've been sitting in Babylonia for at least 70 years, maybe a little longer, according to different people, depending on how you're going to evaluate the years. And then finally, Cyrus the Great brings them back into the land of Israel. They're able to resettle there. They encounter Samaritans. Everyone is at least famous. This combines with Christianity because people know the Samaritans most because of the so-called Good Samaritan in the New Testament. But the Samaritans at the time, being people who lived in the land as the Jews were being brought back, also opposed the Jewish presence in the land of Israel. And they tried to stop a lot of their building projects. They opposed the rebuilding of the Jewish temple. Nonetheless, it happened anyway, and the Jews reestablished themselves within the land. And then after a few hundred years there, Alexander the Great invades, and suddenly the land transforms from having been under Babylonian or Zoroastrian rule to now being under Greco-Roman, well, Greco rule, Hellenic rule at the time. And initially, Hellenism is very friendly. Alexander the Great is well beloved by the Jews, basically because, look, he conquered them, but he leaves them alone. That's not something you can say for a lot of rulers. They often want to establish themselves very strongly. They want to establish their culture in the land, which is also why the Samaritans were the way they were. They were heavily influenced by the foreign invaders, even though they were also descended from Israelites. But Alexander, he left the Jews alone. And he said, you can have your own area and it's totally fine. I don't care how you're going to live your life and run your religion and culture. That's on you. Just be sure to pay taxes.
Mm.
And then as the Jews, this continues for about almost 200 years, where the Jews are living under this Hellenic rule. But what tends to happen here is that, okay, it's not just that, oh, they live under technically Greco rule, but they're not really affected by it. There are non-Jewish people who live in the land as well. We're
Right.
bringing over a foreign culture, foreign beliefs, and even if it's not animosity, slowly but surely, some people are like, you know what? Maybe I'd rather be more Greek than Jewish. The ideas start to seep in, and you inevitably have this fight between what we're going to call pro and anti-Hellenic Hellenizers, people who are for or against Greek assimilation, bring those ideas into the land, or just keeping these their own way,
Mm-hmm.
and that eventually erupts in what becomes the Maccabean Revolt, Hasmonean Revolt. Famously, people know about Hanukkah, but it's a much more complex situation on the ground. It's not that some evil Greek king just suddenly banned Judaism and tried to kill all the
Right.
Jews.
Right.
There are Jews who are working with the Hasmonean king, with the Greek king at the time, Antiochus IV, saying, "Hey, I want to be high priest. If I pay you enough money, make me the high priest, and I'll give you even more money and taxes." And they steal money from other people, and back and forth. It's a it's a really vicious cycle. Where eventually, you get some people saying, "Hey, this is ridiculous." So most famously, the Maccabees uh, are at the pro-Hellenic faction says, look, these so-called observant Jews, these people, they're the ones who are trying to tax dodge. They're causing the problems. You have to clamp down hard on this. You have to give a show of force. So you can't be too Jewish. You have to be more deferential to the Greeks. And that is that. And then the Greek army, the Greek people coming in and saying, okay, you have to be more Greek. You have to sacrifice to our gods. That's when you see the final straw has been broken on the camel's back and people rebel. And they say, no, we cannot be fully Greek. We have to fight back and assert our Jewish identity and our Jewish independence. And that's the story of the books of 1 and 2 Maccabees. Um, and that war lasts for a certain amount of time. And finally, actually, it lasts about 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, the Hasmoneans have totally won. The Greeks are not in control whatsoever of this. Right? It's the Hasmonean kingdom is fully independent, and this is when you start to see the political factions that become very relevant to the Christian period. You see what are now going to call the Pharisees. You see what we're now going to call the Sadducees. And to define our terms, the Pharisees, they are the scholarly class. They are the scribes. They're really paired up very well with the Hasmoneans. The Hasmonean dynasty themselves are actually priests, but the Sadducean class, the Sadducean group, which is generally represents the priests, they represent only a very specific section of the priesthood, which the Hasmonean dynasty themselves did not really come from. And so you have that struggle where they go back and forth on who they're really friends with, whether they're friendly with the Sadducees or the Pharisees, but at least initially it has been started with the Pharisees. And then as things happen, things get more tense within the land of Israel. The Hasmonean dynasty is that each brother, as they go lower, as their descendants come up, they have to fight each other and they come to terrible civil wars. And after these civil wars get so bad, they actually, one of the sides invites Rome to come in and stop this problem. They're inviting foreign intervention from an up and coming world power, which the Hasmonean dynasty in their first revolt actually had secured an initial alliance. They had written a letter to the Roman Senate, say, hey, we see that you guys are going to be very important and we would like to join you and please come to our defense. And they formed that agreement. So the Roman army arrives in the land of Israel and conquers both of them because, of course, why wouldn't they? You see a very weak kingdom here. And in 64 BC, they're turning the Hasmonean dynasty, the Hasmonean kingdom, into a client state of Rome. And so now this is where we start establishing Roman control of the land, which comes with its own problems. They like Greek culture, but they're not Greeks. They have their own understanding of how things should be done. Very interested, of course, also in taxes. And I would say like this entire time, they recognize that these are ancient people who've been in this land. They do accord them a certain level of respect. Julius Caesar, so he accords not a formal citizenship to all the Jews of Judea, but he does accord them many privileges. So in the ancient times, if you're part of the Roman Empire, unlike the Greek Empire, you would have had to send your money every single month towards the temple of Jupiter in Rome. You would have had to support directly idolatry. You would have had to serve in the military. You would have had to house soldiers. And Julius Caesar actually says, "Hey, I've heard from a lot of Jews that that is not really compatible with their religious lifestyle." And he grants them special exemptions not to have to do these things. Like you say, hey, you can continue to serve your gods in your way, and you don't have to engage in things which would be violations of your creed. And however, I would say not all of the Roman leaders tend to be as kind. And as time goes on, you see, similar to the issues with the Hasmonean dynasty, things devolve. The Roman rulers often accord the Jews less and less respect as a political class, not in terms of the people, but in terms of how Judea is being administrated and run. There's one incident where there are frequent massive riots going on because some Roman emperor or another says, I'm going to do something that's going to really tick off the Jews. Caligula very famously wanted to establish one of his busts as an idol in the temple in Jerusalem. And just saying that he was going to do that set off massive riots and massive unrest. That's just one example, but there is another one where one of the head of the Roman guards in Jerusalem essentially mooned the Jewish people on one of their holidays. Again, riots, a lot of people get killed. It's just a very terrible, chaotic situation. That's how many people tend to view from the outside and the inside, view what's happening in this world. So Christianity really comes up in this very tumultuous period where people are extremely fed up with they're fed up with foreign rule. They want to go back to how things were. They want to reestablish a Jewish identity. But how is that going to happen? Because obviously they don't really see themselves as the military power per se. Nobody's waking up and saying, hey, I'm going to gather a bunch of people and we're going to destroy Rome. It's not realistic. But what we do see writings from many of the groups, Christianity included, Dead Sea Scroll sect, every one of them, they're very apocalyptic. They understand that something's going to change and God is going to directly intervene, start almost, whether you're going to call it end of the world process or some kind of supernatural reinvigoration of the people in the land. And that's going to involve massive radical change, not just politically, but religiously as well. The Jews who lived in the Dead Sea Scroll area, who lived in Qumran, the Dead Sea Scroll sect, so they said, that temple is a worthless piece of garbage. Everyone who's there is doing the wrong thing anyway. So God's going to come down, and the teacher of righteousness is going to gather us. We're going to they do believe they'll wage a war. And the sons of light, the good people, are going to beat all the sons of darkness, the evil people, and we're going to take back the temple. All the bad Jews are going to die. All the people who opposed are going to die, and we'll be restored to our rightful place in history. It's a big question what their exact alignment was. They were clearly in touch with the Jerusalem priestly cult. They might have had some associations with them. But the main purpose here is there's just so many groups vying for attention. At the end of the day, Christianity was just one of them. So if you want to start now about the historical Jesus, well, number one, you have to realize that there's not really such a thing we can definitively prove is the historical Jesus. Right. We do not have a single shred of evidence from Jesus's lifetime that addresses Jesus or Christianity. There's no documents, there's no anything. Nothing talks about him or these people. It was very likely an incredibly small group that existed at some point. The scholarly consensus definitely says Jesus definitely had to have existed for any of these movements to come to fruition. But almost anything that you can say about him beyond the most basic facts is interpretations of later documents. It's based on traditions which change over time. You can't really say that we know for any certainty what the historical Jesus was or what he was like. But if we're going to make those assumptions that he exists, so now you say, okay, he's probably born around 4 BCE. We'll just assume that. And he's definitely Jewish. Right. He would have had Jewish views, would have been living as a Jewish person. Mm-hmm. And he probably lived in the Galilee area, since that's what seems to be where he's from by all accounts. And he's ultimately arrested and killed by the Roman and Jewish authorities in around 30 CE. Mm-hmm. Everything else is essentially contentious. It's hard to really say who Jesus was. But if you want to talk, but from all the sources that we have, the earliest sources would be things like Paul. Paul's letters are fairly early. They're if Jesus dies in approximately 30 CE,
Hmm.
Paul is writing in 50 to 60 CE, maybe as early as 48, 49. Although he never himself met Jesus in any way. They were alive contemporaneously, but he never encountered him whatsoever. His Paul's own becoming Christian, his conversion happens as is claimed later. He has a vision on the road to Damascus. He is walking down the road. Suddenly, Jesus appears before him in some kind of vision and says, I hear you're persecuting Christians. Stop that. Stop persecuting me and join me. And Paul says, oh, well, I agree. I become a Christian now. And everything that Paul writes himself, even though he writes in some proximity to the historical Jesus' existence, he doesn't discuss anything really about Jesus' life. So you can't really say anything from this. He discusses a great deal about what the meaning of Jesus is, what his essence is, what the value of his existence was, and how his death does in fact change the world in all sorts of different ways, how it leads to a new theology, how it's someone we need to recognize him as the mediator between us and heaven. But he doesn't say the simplest thing about Jesus' life, other than that he died. So he really doesn't have what to relate. Um, Other sources people are going to talk to, they say, hey, we have the New Testament. What about all these Gospels? Well, according to scholarly consensus, the earliest Gospel is the Gospel of Mark, and that's written about the same time as the temple in Jerusalem is destroyed in about 70 CE. So the
Hmm.
earliest Gospel is written already minimum, we're going to say 40 years after Jesus dies. And it's thought to have been around then based on how it's written. And then you have other gospels. You have the Matthew and Luke. So Matthew, Luke, and Mark all together are composed of what they call the synoptic gospels
Hmm.
because they share a very similar basic layout in terms of how they portray Jesus' life, the stories they tell, what they say, with Mark having the fewest additions to those stories.
Hmm.
And Matthew and Luke both take those same stories that Mark is using and they play on them in their own ways. Matthew is saying, oh, well, I'm going to tell you these stories, but I'm much more interested in Jesus' Jewish aspects, how he relates to the Jewish people, what's his value there. Whereas Luke is not interested in the Jewish aspect of Jesus, he's interested in the value of Jesus in terms of all the Gentiles. How does he relate to the world, the universal religion of Christianity? And then the final part of the New Testament, the Gospel of John, is much more focused on a whole different high Christology. It has its own independent traditions that do not relate whatsoever to any other Gospels, and even sometimes has completed versions of the events that take place. So it sort of exists in its own on the side as its own understanding of what Jesus was. It's more similar to Paul in that it takes a very what they call the high Christology, that Jesus has a very supernatural presence, which doesn't necessarily appear as strongly in the Synoptic Gospels, with Mark having a very earthly human type of Jesus. Um, and so from there, I want to know, I guess, as anything I've said uh, explained a little bit, at least, what the historical Jesus purpose is.
Right. There's so much information that you just said, not enough books to read, not enough time either.
Yeah,
Clearly.
there's many books that can go to or any on strong detail or any aspect of things, but like it's such a complex topic. I've tried to distill it
Mm.
into just even a few minutes to give a summary of what these things are about. Um, I hope I hope some of that's helpful because there's so much that comes out of Christianity. Just obviously, it's something people have studied their entire lives. It's not going to be something that you can cover always in 5 minutes or even an hour. Um, but at least see this is the essential flow of information to this point. And then once Christianity comes to exist, we see that it does not make much of an impact on the Jewish community.
Right.
Um, or probably, yeah, you have you obviously Christianity does exist. All Jews' initial followers are Jews, and it becomes a debate within the early church of okay, well, how Jewish are we really?
Right.
So part of the influence here, again, between like maybe say the Synoptic Gospels and John, or between Paul and the rest of the Jerusalem church, is that they just assume they're Jews and they practice Judaism, but there's a little extra added on in terms of Jesus and what his
Right.
metaphysical purpose is. And only once Paul starts getting into the mix, he says, well, wait a minute. We actually are very interested in a universality of Christianity. We're interested in gathering the non-Jews. So Paul becomes in charge of the mission to the non-Jews. And then it becomes a debate. Well, what does it mean when someone not Jewish becomes Christian? Does that mean they have to be Jewish to also be Christian? And Paul's answer is no, not at all. They're two totally unrelated things. You can be Jewish and Christian, or you can be non-Jewish and Christian. It's they're not mutually exclusive. They don't depend on each other. So Christianity, at the end of the day, even after destruction of the temple, they don't make any inroads whatsoever really with the Jewish world. It seems from all the writings we have, they're essentially ignored. None of our Jewish sources really address them. Not just because I think they're small and fledgling, but because there's a lot of alternative sects going around. And at a time when the Jerusalem temple is destroyed, and Judaism does have to reinvent itself, the people who are essentially in the position of power, who are most compelling on how to do that, are sects which are not bound to the temple. So sects like the Dead Sea Scroll sect, their whole purpose is retaining the temple. They fade away. The Sadducean sect, well, their whole purpose in life is we are priests who serve the temple, so they're gone. But the Pharisees, being the scribes, they can survive, and Christianity, which in its position as maybe Judaism plus, is like able to survive as well because it wasn't really bound to temple. Already in the Gospels, you see rejectionism of the temple practices, saying it's a corrupt institution. These people are not worth it. So they're looking also for their way forward.
Mm-hmm.
But whereas the Pharisees, who become who essentially they become what we call now the rabbis,
Mm-hmm.
are able to pave a way forward of Judaism that connects to what existed prior. Christianity is not really able to address that in the same way because they're already saying we have a new revelation of how things should be done. But that's not what people are looking for. They're looking to reconnect. Jews, I'd say, are not looking to do that. They're looking to reconnect with their past. They're looking to, let's say, remember the temple is destroyed. They're looking for it today won't be reestablished. Christians are able to play on a completely different mentality. That is, in the non-Jewish world. So I mentioned before, there was actually a great respect for Jews and Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just something that they held in a legal stance, or even in their wisdom literature. So there's actually a very interesting story from Josephus where he talks about one of the tales from this particular Hecatus of Abara, and he encounters a Jewish person. He's part of an army, and he meets a Jewish person in the land of Israel. And so this Jewish horseman, he says, begins traveling with them. They just happen to travel together, safety numbers. What a nice thing. And as the army regiment is marching forward, they have there what they call an augury. An augury was something that ancient Roman armies would use, that they would send birds and they'd read the signs. So like the bird flies around a certain way. Oh, that tells us to stop. It tells us to go.
Right. Yeah.
And so the Jewish person sees them doing this. He says, "What are you guys doing?" And they tell him, "Oh, this is a special bird. It's able to predict, tell us the future, whether or not we should pursue our regiment or stop." And so when he hears this, the Jewish person then takes out his bow and arrow and he shoots the bird dead. And they're all like freaking out. They're like, "What are you doing? How could you possibly do this? This is insane. That was a valuable bird. It sees the future. It's so important. How could you do this?" And he says, "Well, if it's such a good bird seeing the future, then I wouldn't be able to kill it because it would have known how to dodge my attacks."
Yeah.
So he
So
already just see so already this is being related 2,000 years ago is like, oh, the Jews are kind of a smart bunch. They really have a certain logic to them that we have to respect, even though it clashes very much with our ethics. So this respect evolves in the Roman Empire to the point where not just this, but not that they respect it, but there are many people converting to Judaism. And tells the source of Jews actually would go out and search for followers. Not like today where Judaism is content to sit back, but back then they would really push hard, almost proselytizing against idolatry. They say this is not acceptable for anybody to be doing. So you also become Jewish, and they gather more people. And at one point, it's estimated maybe 10% of the empire is Jewish.
Right.
So the and then there are many people who are reported. It's not that they don't become Jewish because of all sorts of complications to become Jewish. Being Jewish is reported to be much more popular for women than it was for men. Obviously, men gotta get circumcised. Not very popular in the ancient world. Women, they don't have to do that, so there's much lower barrier for entry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but even if you don't do that, so there were entire classes, what they call the God-fearers. And the God-fearers are people who just like Judaism. They would show up, even though they're pagans in various ways, they would show up in the Jewish temples, the Jewish synagogues, to worship, to sacrifice, whatever they wanted to do, because they just say, "Oh, this is a nice old religion. I like being part of it. I'm not maybe interested in converting because maybe it's too difficult." But
Mm-hmm.
Christianity is able to take advantage of this. That's where they find their niche. Paul goes on a mission to all these non-Jews. He says, "Don't worry about circumcision. You don't have to do that.
Right.
Don't worry about kosher. You don't got to do that. All you need to do is say, hey, I believe in the Jewish God, and by the way, Jesus is the way to the Jewish God,
Right.
and that's very much easier to take up than what it existed prior." And there's also the conflicts. There's also the issues within the Jewish church how that ends up playing on reality. Um, but Paul's faction ends up taking over, and you see Christianity as a whole moving away from Judaism, although it takes a long time. There is a lot of virulent writings which are written from the perspective of Christians against Judaism because they're very interested in going away from Judaism. They want to establish their own dominance, and that requires a lot of virulence. Unlike Judaism, which could honestly have cared less about Christianity because it wasn't significant to them at the time. There's many writings between the Pharisees against the Sadducees because that was their main competitor. But there's no writings against Christians because they frankly didn't give them the time of day. They couldn't care less. It's just not a threat to them, not interesting. But for Christians who are saying, okay, we need to separate ourselves, a lot of their writings are strongly anti-rabbinic, anti-Sadducean, all those who they saw as these guys are the threats to us. And then going forward from that, it's just, again, it takes hundreds of years for this to really finalize, and it's not until that Christians essentially start taking over the Roman Empire because they grow so strongly amongst the Gentile population, and of course, conversion of Constantine in the 300s. That's when Judaism is largely not as present in the land of Israel because of various wars that have been fought, because they're moving to other places. The main intellectual centers starts to move away from Israel. So they still don't really deal with Christianity as much. It's not like it wasn't so comfortable for Jews under Christian domination. But again, for hundreds of years, even beyond that, it was fluctuating back and forth. They had secured preferred treatment going back to the time of Julius Caesar. They can't, even though Constantine was emperor and people after him, Domitian, they couldn't change that overnight. It took a real shift of the populace for suddenly there to be a real identifiable threat and a problem. So it's only in the times of, say, the Talmud, which is written in between, let's say, 5 and 600 CE, where you start to see some negative Christian sentiment, although they live in Babylonia where there aren't a ton of Christians. Their primary problem there are the Zoroastrians,
Mm-hmm.
who the rabbis accuse, oh, they're worshiping fire. It's much more complicated than that, but that's where they are. And you see a number of stories of, oh, there are Christians, but they don't seem to be very knowledgeable about Christianity sometimes. Other than, I mean, belief in Jesus is not very there's not a whole lot of intellectual rules that go along with it. It's much more, do you believe in Jesus or not? So, do you have any questions you've thought of so far?
No, I mean, like I said, there's so much information. I'm very curious. I knew that Jesus was Jewish, but everything has changed completely to a completely new religion where the sole purpose of being Jewish, because you're Jewish, Jesus was Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has completely changed and forgotten like basically your entire roots are eliminated because you just want
Right.
to have a completely new religion, period.
So that's, I mean, hopefully, like that's something I would like to, I'm happy to explain. But again, we don't really know what Jesus himself thought or how much of a religion he thought he was even creating. because so much of this sentiment of the changes arise from Paul, arise from later church leaders, that it's impossible to say what he thought. And even there are stories within the New Testament people will point to, say, oh, Jesus is looking to abandon the law or not abandon the law. So in Matthew, Jesus actually states that I've not come to forsake the old law, I've only come to fulfill it, that he's carrying forward the torch, because Matthew is much interested in promoting that pro-Jewish sentiment. Yes, we do want to have those relationships. But then people point to, oh, but over here, look in Mark, you have the story of Jesus starts to eat bread, and he didn't wash his hands. And people ask him, well, why aren't you washing your hands? What's going on here? And he makes a statement that it's not about what goes in the mouth, but what comes out of it. Now, this is obviously in context about ritual purity, that he has a very different perception of ritual purity than the rabbis of the time did, if we're taking this to be somewhat historical.
Right.
But later interpreters now take this as a rejection of kosher rules, for example, even though in context it clearly has nothing to do with that. It's much more accurate if anyone's interested in looking at when the Christianity officially says gets rid of kosher rules. They start looking to the book of Acts, where you have Peter, who's one of the early church leaders, who was actually a pro-Jewish leader. He's opposed to some degree to Paul's faction, even though he accepts him as the missionizer for Gentile populace. Paul brings back non-Jewish Gentiles who are Christians. He says these people are Christians and they should be here with us. Peter, being a lot more conservative in this regard, says, well, they're not Gentiles, and so we really shouldn't be eating together with them. We should have them separate. Which was one way that people would keep kosher, was to make sure, okay, well, if I'm going to keep kosher, I can't have people who aren't keeping kosher at my table. We have to eat separately, so there's no mix-ups. And then after Peter says that, he has a vision from God where God tells him that, nope, what Paul is doing is right, and you should accept these people in. And so again, people tended to interpret that relating to kosher rules, that he's getting kosher rules. But in context, it also seems to not necessarily be about that. But Christianity is in the process at that point of, okay, how do we move against what has traditionally been held to be true? And it's much more Paul but especially John, those groups who are a lot less attuned with the older Jewish ways, who are saying, okay, how do we move away from our old rules, and how do we move towards a new theology where Jesus is serving to change the world a little bit more intently, where the Old Testament has no purpose anymore. So Jesus certainly must have been some kind of revolutionary figure to have affected his people in this way. But I highly doubt. And anybody who looks at the sources, like, you can't say that there would have been any indication that he would have thought that he's actually creating something new, so much as he was an apocalyptic prophet. He was saying, hey, the end of the world is coming, and I'm going to establish a new kingdom of God. I'm going to establish a new way for people to connect with religion. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's abandoning Judaism, so much as he is stating a new way of connecting to it. Yeah. Christianity, as we know it, is 100% much, much more the creation of Paul than it is Jesus. It really is Paulinity.
Yeah, that is the one thing that I was very curious about, because even from everything that you just said so far, nothing is talked about the Palestine as a whole. There's no correlation to it.
So yeah, there really, in terms of Jesus, like, there is no connection to Palestine, and again, in the modern sense. And you can't really apply modern terms to ancient historical situations. Everything is very different. If someone's going to deny that the Jews have a presence in the land of Israel, well, that's just simply counter to all historical facts that all of scholars know about. It's no secret that the Jews have always been in the land of Israel since they originally came in the biblical times. But beyond that, what does a Palestinian mean at that point? It means anybody who happens to live there, and that's what it meant essentially until 1948 or 1967, however you want to define it.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting. I guess at this point, it's just, I'm not trying to prove our existence to the world. I really wanted to invite you here so that we can share the knowledge of history, and history cannot be changed. It's just that the whole concept of Jewishness, I guess, right? It doesn't, it's, I guess the whole religion, how would you describe how did the Jewish, how did they come about, like being Jewish? Did we just
Um, in
pop
what
out of
time period are you talking about? When are you
from the
talking
very
about?
beginning? If we were in a land of Israel for thousands of years, how did we, where did we come from?
Well, at a certain point, I mean, similar to Christianity, at the end of the day, there is such a thing. There is a point at which there's no such thing as Judaism. Judaism is something that happens over time, and even what we call Judaism is a religion that evolved over time. So,
Mhm.
which Judaism now is not the same thing as Judaism 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. It's not the same thing as Judaism 3,000 years ago. Beyond that, there might not be a Judaism. Um, it's things change drastically depending on the context and situation.
Mm.
But what's significant is at the end of the day, it's the same people. So if you want to go to the very, very beginnings, Judaism is only truly, well, pre-Judaism, they call it biblical Judaism, is really Israelitism. There is no Judaism. Anybody calling anybody in the Bible a Jew, technically that's an anachronism. Judaism is a reference to the religion of those people who came from Judah. And Judah, the meaning the kingdom of Judah,
Mhm.
was one of two kingdoms that existed in the land of Israel at a later date than the creation of, let's call it again, Israelitism. So when, if you want to go through biblical history, following the Bible's own narrative, you
Mhm.
have the Jews coming to being in the land of Israel after they received the Torah on Mount Sinai, and they conquer the Canaanite peoples of the land. They establish themselves first. They just they take up a presence. That's the book of Judges, that they exist in the land. There's the tabernacle, which is found in Shiloh, but there's not any formal power structure. You don't have a king, you don't have a temple. And it's not until much later where suddenly you have they anoint Saul to be king over all the tribes.
Right.
And next follows David, who takes over from Saul, and then you have Solomon, who finally establishes the power center. I mean, David establishes the power center within Jerusalem. He originally rules from Hebron, but he moves to Jerusalem. And then Solomon is the one who builds the temple.
Mhm.
And then, according to this narrative, his sons, Rehoboam and Jehoboam, they end up splitting the kingdom. So you had at only through Saul to Solomon, you have a united kingdom of Israel, and then they're split in half because the two sons disagree. And the ten tribes, the 10 northern tribes,
Right.
all say, hey, you know what? Really, we actually we'd rather be together, and we don't believe the temple in Jerusalem is the main one. And they set up a competing temple on Mount Gerizim.
Mhm.
And this is also part of where the Samaritans end up coming from, that they are descendants of some of those northern tribes. And then both Judah and Benjamin form a single kingdom just called the Kingdom of Judah, and that maintains the Jerusalem temple cult.
Mhm.
And the entire time, you can go through the Bible and you see all sorts of different relationships to the political structures, to personal observance. It's a very complicated situation. Even though supposedly you have this temple in Jerusalem, you still with a priesthood, you still find people offering sacrifice in their backyard according to the biblical narrative. Not supposed to be doing that. Or you find a guy who has idols and he even hires his own priest in his house. It's they're not exactly aligned with what the Torah seems to be implying everyone should be doing.
Right.
And so to sort of cut to where this takes place, where this is relevant to us is eventually the kingdom of Israel falls. It's conquered by the Assyrian group, and the Assyrian kingdom exiles many of the people who live in the northern tribes to to Assyria, and brings in some of its own people who mingle with those who are left. And then they do not take over the kingdom of Judah. So the king of Judah is essentially the last one left standing for another
Mhm.
100 years or so. And then finally, in 586, the Babylonian Empire now rises and takes over everything, including the temple, including the king taking over the kingdom of Judah, and they end up destroying the temple. which at first the Babylonian Empire tries leaving the Jews there, tries not to. It's not really in the business of moving people around like Assyrian Empire was, so it leaves them there in the land, and just appoints one of the Jewish people to be the governor over the region,
Hmm.
Gedaliah. And some people who were very politically upset about the situation, they said this is untenable, and they're Jewish people. They had a Gedaliah assassinated. They killed him,
Oh, wow.
and after they killed the Jewish leader, the Jewish governor, then the Babylon king's like, okay, you guys are nuts, and then he exiles them to Babylon,
Oh,
and
wow.
that's when they stay in Babylon for the however long they stay there before they come back and rebuild the temple, as I mentioned earlier.
Hmm. Oh, wow.
That's sort of like that's the origins of Judah, and the first mention of essentially, even though the kingdom of Judah obviously are following the same per se Israelite religion, but only now in Babylon do you see it being called Judaism.
Mm.
So most famously in the book of Esther, normally people are referred to, oh, this is so and so of whatever tribe he's a part of. So Mordecai, who is a major figure in the book of Esther, it talks about his lineage and how he is a Benjaminite,
Mm.
the Jew. They actually specifies he is a Jewish person. He's no longer just like some person who belongs to a particular tribe. He's not just an Israelite, but he's specifically identified with having the religion of the kingdom of Judah, and that's where Judaism comes into being as a term.
Hmm. Interesting. Wow. It's a it's a crazy, crazy history that we have. It's conquering
It's
and regrouping and growing over and over and over again historically.
like people think that Jews have been exiled, like, oh, where are these Jews coming from? The Jews have been exiled from the land of Israel quite a few times, but the other day they always keep coming back. That is one of the sort of facts of history. The Jews
Mm.
eventually get kicked out and they eventually get brought back. Kicked out again, brought back. Kicked out again, brought back. It happens multiple times. Um,
Do you know
so
from which year specifically that it started? I know you've been
which
telling about the history like that.
which one?
The first time that we were exiled from the land of Israel, before maybe it was called
So
Israel.
the first exile takes place in 586 BCE. That's the Babylonian exile.
586 BC.
586 BCE.
Okay.
If you want to talk about if you want to include even the Syrian taking over the northern tribes, that happens about 50 years earlier in the 620s BCE.
Wow.
And then, so from 586 to let's say the early 500s, that's when the Jews are brought back. Then they're there consistently the entire time until the Romans there are three wars between Rome and Jews of Jews of Judea. So the first Roman wars results in the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, but they don't actually exile the Jews at this point. They do impose a tax on the Jews, saying, "Hey, you guys made us this really costly war. We're upset at you." So then all Jews in the empire suddenly find themselves with a brand new tax they have to pay.
Hmm.
Um, but then they don't actually exile the Jews from land. Then there's a second Jewish war, which takes place around between like not depending how when you count, it's a little complicated how you evaluate this war. Around 100 to 110 CE,
Okay.
where it's more of a tax war that they're just upset about paying taxes. So there's a lot of results. It takes place mostly in Egypt. It's not exactly in the land of Israel, but it's generally called the Second Jewish War. But the third Jewish war, which is really the final Jewish war, is the Bar Kokhba revolt, which takes place in 134 BC, 134 CE,
Hmm.
and that one is where even though it's been so long since the temple was destroyed, the Jews are very well organized. They take over. They take over the land. They hold it for several years. They even manage to defeat an entire Roman legion, which is unheard of in the ancient world. So it's actually quite a big victory. Um,
Wow.
but eventually they do falter, and Rome takes the place back, and they said, "Okay, again, you guys are too crazy for us. We have to do something about this." And they boot many of the Jews from the land of Israel. However, it's not like they kill get rid of every single last Jew in the land of Israel. They
Right.
continue to live there, but they're banned from large areas. So, for example, they're not allowed anywhere near Jerusalem by Roman law. Essentially, the entire center of Israel has to be Jew free. They're allowed to live in the north. They're allowed to stay in the Galilee region. But they're not allowed to come down except at very special occasions. They'll give a special permission to come back and visit, but generally they're not allowed there. And that's the state of affairs for the next few hundred years.
Hmm.
And only with around by the time like 300-400, then suddenly you start to see a much larger push from the Roman government, probably on the side because of Christians, to push Jews further out of the land of Israel. And that's when you see the final fall of the Sanhedrin stops existing.
Oh wow.
Um, the Sanhedrin being the primary Jewish legal religious power structure. And the entire time, Jews are living in Babylonia too. It's not like Jews didn't live other places. Jews also live in Rome. Jews lived all over the world, the known world at the time. It's just, but the land of Israel starts to be occupied by Jews less and less. Again, there's not really a full eradication of Jews, but they're very small and not very powerful, to the point where a few hundred years later, they're essentially treated as a complete afterthought. They have, whereas one time that was Jerusalem and the Sanhedrin were the center of the Jewish religion, the center of Jewish power. Now the Babylonian academies, the places where the rabbis occupy, are the center of Jewish religious power. That's where everything is being decided and ruled from. So in the ninth century, one of the so-called Gaonim, one of these major Jewish thought leaders,
Mm-hmm.
so he has all these calendrical calculations and how things should be done. And some rabbis write to him from Israel, the land of Israel, saying, "We don't agree with what you're doing." And he writes them back, "Too bad, and you better start doing what I tell you to do."
Wow.
which can only happen when you have the power.
Right.
And so like the Jewish population continued to exist all the way up until the existence of an, until the 1880s, where that's when you start to see a resurgence of Israel, not just as like a place where a few lone communities happen to exist, but
Right.
that's where people can start coming back. Obviously, during the times of Crusades, there's many times Jews are killed en masse in the land of Israel as well. Um, there's forced conversions when Islam takes over. When the Crusades come, Christians kill Jews left, right, and center. Like Jews are being slaughtered in the land the entire time through other wars that are occurring. But it's not like. But the point is like there were Jews there the entire time. Um, it's sort of like the same way that people say like, oh, Eliezer ben Yehuda revived Hebrew as a language.
Mm-hmm.
Like Hebrew is a dead language, which is not quite accurate. It's not like people were on a daily basis speaking Hebrew, but
Mm-hmm.
we see in the Hebrew literature that exists that it is still somehow an evolving language, is functioning along certain classes. And Jews knew it widely enough that if a Jew from Spain and a Jew from Russia were to meet each other, they communicate utilizing Hebrew. It
Mm-hmm.
still is a functional language. Ben Yehuda only revived Hebrew as sort of like a daily language purpose, but people were able to speak it. He expanded the vocabulary to encompass all sorts of new ideas that didn't exist in, let's say, traditional rabbinic literature or thought.
Wow, that is so interesting. Yeah, the more you dive in, the more you see information I've obviously never heard before. So you've been into history for what, your whole life? You just a history.
Well, like my background has just always been I'm very interested in Jewish history, certainly
Mhm.
my entire life. I got my master's, obviously, as I mentioned, in ancient Jewish history from YU, from Yeshiva University. Um, and there I studied under Dr. Stephen Fine, Lawrence Schiffman, and Yaakov Ellman. So Stephen Fine is as famous as a classicist thinker. Lawrence Schiffman is famous as one of Dead Sea Scrolls scholars. Yaakov Ellman is more of Talmudic intellectual thought, very interesting in its own right. Before that, I got my bachelor's degree also in Jewish history from the University of Cincinnati.
Wow. Do you teach your family everything yourself, or do you just outsource?
And anybody who asks, I'm happy. I'm happy to share. It's not like it comes up. Again, I find it very interesting. I have many books on all sorts of different topics that I always like to delve into. And there's many books I can recommend depending on what someone might be interested in Jewish history. Like if you're talking about New Testament, so one of the most valuable works to get is actually called the Jewish Annotated New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
It contains, aside from many historical scholars, secular scholars talking about different aspects of life in those times for all the parties who are involved. It also contains many references. So someone reading the New Testament, what's hard for a lot of Christians, they don't really understand the context
Mm-hmm.
because they cut out so much of this Jewish knowledge. They don't look at it.
Right.
And they don't realize, again, when they see Jesus saying, oh, it's not what goes in the mouth, what comes out of it, they don't understand what the conversation even is. And if you don't understand what the conversation is, how can you really understand what he's talking about in the first place? And that's why it's easy to mistake and say, oh, he's talking about kosher. Well, it doesn't. If you don't know anything about Judaism, yeah, you might think that it means kosher because that may be the one or two things you know. But Judaism is so much more complex than that. Or when you see Jesus one time, so he's walking down a field and he plucks a grain on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees chase after him, saying, "What are you doing? That's against the Sabbath. That's breaking the Sabbath rules." And Jesus says, "No, no, it's fine." And he explains why, which is not relevant this time. But the point is like it's not that he it's not really about a rejection of Judaism, its rules, it's often a reinterpretation or a new understanding that he's reaching through a different particular theology, even through the lens of whatever gospel author you're talking about that's trying has a specific agenda behind it.
Right.
And another work that might be good would be if someone's interested in both the development of early Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism. There's a book called Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism by Banks, which has many essays from leading scholars in the field talking about where these things come to be, going all the way up until I would say the late almost thousands, almost medieval period. And then I like this book, Anti-Judaism, the Western Tradition, which is very relevant for understanding exactly why people hate the Jews and how that is built in to our society in so many ways. And in part because of how Jews are portrayed, because early Christians are so intent on separating themselves from Judaism and establishing their own priority. Look, they granted say some very negative things. They have a very negative view of the Jewish power structure of the time, and that becomes built into how people think about their world and they think about their religion. And I think about even their politics. So continuing with sort of like that theory, there's a book I also really appreciate called it's by John Paul Sartre and Anti-Semite and Jew, where he basically discusses how if the Jew doesn't exist, the anti-Semite would create him. If somehow ever they killed all the Jews in the world, they would start saying someone else is a Jew. And actually, the Anti-Judaism book agrees with this. That's by David Nirenberg, because he actually shows examples from history. In places like England, there's a time where they banned all Jews. So Jews didn't live in England for hundreds of years because it was illegal for them to live there. And yet there are people there, different factions, accusing each other of being too Jewish. This guy's a Jew. This guy's a Jew. They don't mean that this guy is Jewish in what we call the traditional sense that I'm Jewish. They mean this in terms of this guy has adopted what they consider to be a perverse ideology, and he is submissive to it, because that is how Judaism is often portrayed through the New Testament and the early church fathers, because of these, I'd say, honestly, misunderstandings, and also need to establish their own power structures.
So you basically come up with information out of thin air just because you want to hate something. And
it's
Jews.
the Jews are the scapegoat. They are the scapegoat of Western tradition. There's precedence for it, and it's extremely it harms Jews quite severely, unfortunately. But it's not like they're coming out of nowhere. But this is the framing device that a lot of the world's picked, and I think this comes out also in how a lot of the world views the situation in Israel. They have a certain view of how Jews are and how Jews should be, and Israel essentially has become the world's Jew. So it doesn't matter how well it's performing. It doesn't matter if they try to avoid, let's say, civilian casualties. They're still essentially evil. They're still fulfilling these ancient ideas and words. As someone actually said very interestingly, like if Jews are not caring about civilian casualties, if Israel doesn't care about civilian casualties, then they're doing the worst job possible at trying to kill civilians. Because they dropped they admittedly killed 20,000 people. Whatever proportion of them are Hamas, whatever, let's say more than half, let's say even half of them are civilians. Let's say a little more than half, whatever it is. They dropped like 20,000 bombs. So like one bomb per person is a terrible ratio. If you're trying to indiscriminately kill people, it's not very good. They either have the worst weapon systems in the world, or they actually are trying to avoid killing people. Right. We could kill 10 with 20,000 bombs. You could kill 10 times as many people, no problem.
And somebody actually just said today, we were trying to interview someone who's, have a little debate, and the person said, yes, I understand. You can totally eradicate the land of Gaza, but you won't because then the rest of the world is gonna destroy you. So you're scared to do that. So
I mean, that's true for some people. I like to think that they wouldn't do that because at the end of the day, it's not right. That's
no,
not
of course not. Of course.
but that certain. I look. A lot of people say I think very nasty things because emotions are charged. There are also political ideologies that I think are extremely negative that give people the completely wrong impression of how to behave.
Mhm.
And that's why someone could say something casually like, "Oh, just blow up all of Gaza." Like that is. I agree. That's a disgusting statement. That's not how we should be approaching this. Um, yeah, you have to kill people who are trying to kill you. There's no question about that. But we know from Judaism, like that doesn't mean we indiscriminately want to just murder everybody, even if that's what other countries would do. And if you take the same, I actually I'm on Reddit and I occasionally look at other subreddits to sometimes see what they're saying about, it's particularly the Israel situation, and it's sometimes very fascinating. And I don't mean by going to Palestine. I know what they're going to say on the Palestine subreddit, but in the Sudan subreddit right now, really fascinating how much fighting there is in that subreddit over how much people care about the Palestinian war
Mhm.
and couldn't give one iota about what's happening in Sudan right now. Nobody cares about Sudan. Nobody cares about Ethiopia. Nobody cares about these places where there are active civil wars, where hundreds of thousands of people are dying,
Well,
who
their
are actively
theory
trying to murder each
is
other.
right, exactly. But their theory is, well, now we're aware of it. I'm like, but you're still not talking about it. You're still not doing anything about it. You're still stuck on the Jews who you feel should be eradicated, not just
Yeah,
from the land of Israel, but worldwide.
yeah. They say no Jews, no news. It doesn't matter if the Jews aren't
Literally.
involved because
Yeah.
if an Arab kills an Arab, whoop-de-doo, nobody cares. That's
Mhm.
fine. You're not gonna see protests, and there's some interesting anger in these subreddits, with Yemen subreddit, the Sudan subreddit, Morocco subreddit. Like no one's protesting over these things.
No.
They're not protesting for ceasefires, not protesting for nothing. Like even if they supposedly care, they clearly don't, and they see people see that. They still have to say, hey, we're still anti-Israel, we're still opposed, and we care about what's happening in Gaza. But can't they say why don't people care about our cause? Because at the end of the day, they don't want to accept the reality that people just they have a particular disdain for Jews and Judaism. And the same thing when it comes to Zionism, which is its own whole history and discussion of where exactly Zionism comes from and its place within Judaism. But at the end of the day, Zionism is a statement that no other ethnic group needs to say. No one would need to say, "Hey, I'm Yemenite, and therefore I believe Yemen should be a country." It's
Exactly.
not. It's obvious. It's patently obvious. But there actually had to be a specific movement of Jews to say, "Hey, we want to have our own state in the land of Israel," and that's all that being Zionist really means. That we deserve to belong to be exist in our ancient homeland.
Mhm.
It doesn't include. There's no other parts to it. It's a
Right.
simple basic thing. And the only way that someone can truly deny that right is to play all sorts of very funny games, either with history or with purpose. People who deny the Jews' right to live in the land of Israel, well, why are the Jews, let's say, colonizers when, frankly, all the Palestinians, they're not from there either. A
No.
lot of them are Jews were forcibly converted to Islam hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Also, so a lot of them are Arabs who are imported from other areas.
Mhm.
Like at a certain point, you have to find a way to just accept the status quo, unless you're going to go around and murder a bunch of people, which is what Hamas and many others try to do. You
Mhm.
have to accept that, hey, okay, these people are here now. Practically, how do we make that work? And it seems there's many parts of the world that are not interested in that because they want to live in sort of like a fantasy land where, oh, problems can be magically solved if only X, Y, or Z didn't exist.
Exactly.
It's not a recipe for any serious peace. And it's especially a very difficult situation. If sometimes people will try to compare it to, let's say, what about Native Americans? And putting aside, whether how Palestinians are not like Native Americans,
Mhm.
but it's okay. Imagine if Native Americans, okay, they're not from
None of
whatever reservation that
yep.
they live on. That's where the U.S. government forced them to live. So
Mhm.
now, should they have the right to go back to, let's say, Ohio and murder random families in Ohio because hey, they want to live there again? It's a very strange. It's a very strange idea. Every human being at a certain point moves to a place where they weren't originally. Unless we're talking about the deepest depths of Africa where humans evolved from, you're
Right.
talking
Right.
about these people weren't here. At some point, they moved here, and that doesn't really. If that gives you rights in perpetuity,
Mhm.
Well, then that's an impossible scenario to maintain. You can't say that for all countries. And if they don't deserve to be in perpetuity, when are you going to cut that off? So why magically are Arabs who happen to live in the land of Israel in 1948 more entitled to land than anybody else?
Right.
And if so, well, okay, what if so now you have what if they're kids? You have Palestinians who've moved to, let's say, Canada, and their grandkids now are growing up in Canada. Do they? So you want to say that they should have a right to return? Okay, are they occupying Canada
Right.
because they're
Exactly.
not from Canada? It's just where they're allowed to live. It's where they're allowed to move. Um, and often you hear, of course, similar mistakes when it comes to, okay, well, what about the fact that, oh, these Jews are European in origin? So they're going to say, they're going to make a whole thing about how the Ashkenazi Jews are a creation of Europe. I
Mhm.
mean, first of all, more than half of Israel is not Ashkenazi Jews. More than half of Israel are Mizrahi, Sephardic Jews who were kicked out of lands, Muslim lands, in post 1948 because they really hated Jews. They were upset about Israel existing.
Right.
Now, but even putting that aside, they're essentially claiming that first of all, the Khazar theory, which is widely discredited and completely false, has no basis in any sort of reality or fact,
Mhm.
is true. Okay, let's say it's true. Does that mean that someone converts to Judaism, they're not real Jews? Like they're not thinking these things through, and they don't care. No, most people don't care about what the implications of their statements.
Right.
These are real issues that require real consideration, and everything is just a talking point to achieve the ultimate goal, which is the Jews are bad, therefore they're wrong. Whatever is the worst possible outcome for them. That's all people are interested in. They're not interested in intellectual honesty or consistency.
Mhm. Right. Exactly. Yeah, and explaining something to these type of people is really, I guess, not our job. This is why conversations
You're
like
never
this.
going to answer that. You're
Right.
never going to answer somebody who opposes you on a belief basis. If
Mm-hmm.
someone opposes you on intellectual grounds, if they come to a decision based on facts, sure. But these days, it's just the same thing. If someone's, let's say, you're a Republican, and your best friend become a radical Democrat, or vice versa. You're a very strong Democrat. Your parents or whatever are now super Trumpy, and they're very consumed by the cult of Trump. People didn't choose these things because, well, I evaluate all the factors and I decided that this makes the most sense to me. And if you show me something against that, I'll change my mind.
Mm-hmm.
That's not That would be the best. That would be the best way. That's how people should be behaving. But that's not why. That's not why they did that. That's not why they're following Trump. That's not why someone is chanting pro-Palestine. It's an emotional appeal,
Yeah.
similar to Christianity itself. Judaism, I would say, is an intellectual religion bent on we have rules, we have consistency, we have ways of thinking about things. Christianity is, does it feel right?
Right.
And something that feels right may in fact be very wrong. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not how you're not taught, it's not part of the theology to challenge that in these religions.
Right.
Even though Islam in some ways should be more closer to us, politically they've become subsumed by the same ideologies.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So, what is your final conclusion to this? I guess, like I said, it's a very, very um complex subject because there's so much history behind just the Jewish people, the land, the religion that came after, like Christianity, and then the Muslim, or Islam. It's so obviously, like you said, you cannot discuss it in just like 1 hour because it's more complex than that. But at least, um, again, like it's even hard to find certain words because you can't change people's mind. It's the way it's innate. It's something that's in their blood. You cannot change what is taught and believed from a very, very early day. Why Jewish people are the way they are is because that's how we are. And I think, like I always say, Jewish people are very educated and humane culture, not nation. We have
Hmm.
never historically attacked anybody. We have always been removed and ethnically cleansed, and unfortunately the genocide actually has been committed on us over and over again just because. And like the more I'm listening to you in the story that you have just said now, like it just doesn't make any sense for me. I cannot understand why Jewish people are so hated. I'm still proud to be Jewish. I wouldn't want to change it for the world because I know that even if you hate me, at the end of the day, I haven't done anything to hurt you. So that's something that you need to work on, and you need to change your way or your way of life and thinking, because I can't not exist unless that's what God decides.
Yeah. And let's see, I think the Jewish religious belief is at the end of the day, Jews continue to exist
Mhm.
only because, let's call it the grace of God,
Right.
because nobody, no nation, no one in the world will be able to survive what the Jews survive and stay who they are. Jews
Exactly.
are, there's a reason we survived for, for over 3,000 years. It's not an accident. It has a lot to do with who we are as a people and our belief system and how we're connected to it. And we say to God as well. Um, but if it was Christianity, there are many groups in ancient Israel who existed, who had different opinions, who wanted to change things one way or another.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, like they all died, and Judaism out survived them,
Yeah.
and it was certainly rabbinic Judaism out survived them. And it just has to do with like our flexibility and our capability to adapt. It's something that you need, like some to talk about Jews is always like you have to. I'm wary of saying anything that someone's going to take away and say, oh, Jews adapting, that means they're sneaky. But the truth is, like anything you could say positive about Jews is something that someone can turn into a negative, and just as they would take that same thing and apply something else that are positive. Like if you say someone's good with money, you can say, oh, that's because they're so miserly and selfish and yada yada, like they hate
See,
money so much.
right,
Or you
right.
could say, oh, how smart is he that he knows how to use his resources properly?
Right. It's a point of view. It all depends on what vibration that you vibe on, that you choose to either make your pain into a purpose or take the negative into a positive, as opposed to just be a victimized mentality, or like they say, we oppress them. No,
Yeah.
it's
And you look
choice.
at anti-Semitism, it's the same thing,
Mhm.
where they'll say this again. They say that about Jews. Jews control all businesses. Okay, in the Western world, that's a negative. It's like how evil are the Jews? They control all the businesses,
Then we
and then
wouldn't even have to work.
which we aside from the fact that it's obviously not true, like the idea of it is insane. That it's so terrible. So Jews run all the business. How did they have gotten that way? If it was true, then shouldn't they? So then shouldn't be able to do other things, whatever. But in the Eastern world, so we're talking about the Orient, you're talking about China, Japan. They see these same anti-Semitic claims that the Jews are running the world, and instead of saying that's terrible, that's insidious, we need to stop these people, they say, well, if they run the world, clearly they're doing something right. We need to emulate them.
Right.
So so like in China, there's these books are all sort of kind of garbage, but they have a lot of books about how the way to do business according to the Jewish texts. Because the idea is Jews are so smart about business. Again, it's an anti-Semitic trope, but the Jews are smart about business. Instead of trying to stop them, well, they say we should copy them. They must know what they're doing. That's the right way to be. And so even anti-Semitism can be flipped on its head if you're truly open and not weighed down by, let's call it, again, the Western tradition of hating Jews.
Yeah, it's like the saying, is the cup half full or half empty?
Yeah.
It's all about how you view life. And obviously, after October 7th, like this person we were just talking to, who's on the side of, you know, Palestine, even though he always says, we're so humane and we all believe in humanity. But at the end of the day, if you're looking at it, how your people are losing life, but our people caused it when we're the ones who have been attacked, and we're still trying to make the best of the situation. We pray for the peace of both. We still try our best to make the best out of the situation, trying to find something smart. And that is what makes us beautiful. That's what makes Jewish people thrive, because like I said, the more I dive into our religion and our culture, we have always been separated.
Yeah.
And here we are. I'm from Russia. Like, I don't even know much about, you might as well, I was raised like a Russian girl, like a Christian girl. Even though we had major holidays in the household, I was never raised to the same depth as you were. You know so much about a history, but like the way we live our life and the way we treat others is how to me, that is what Judaism is. We never screw somebody or backstab somebody in the back just so that we can grow and get what we have today. If I don't have it, I don't have it. If I didn't work hard for it, I don't work hard for it. And that's the whole point of humanity. You have to evolve, you have to move on, and you have to find something about yourself that you can say, you know what, I made it. I'm an asset to society. And if you're not, like you said, no Jews, no news.
Yeah.
Nobody cares. So at the end of the day, we're always going to be proud of who we are, because no matter what the world thinks, we are going to be the thriving part of the nation, because we are always looking to evolve and make ourselves, become better versions of ourselves. Learn from our, I don't know if they're mistakes, but learn from what we have been up against for so many years, generations, and still here. I think it's an honor, honestly. I think it's a gift. And by God's grace, we're still here.
Right. I agree with that 100%. If nothing else, it's always valuable for people to realize nothing is black and white. Everything's way more complicated than you thought, and that's why life is the way it is. It's never as simple as someone good, someone bad. There's a lot of mixed things on all sides, and the only way that we come to the truth is through a careful analysis and discussion of whether it's history and evaluating all the evidence, or modern political situations, like really thinking hard about, okay, how do we seriously benefit all the sides? We're too used to the idea of like, oh, World War II, Nazis, pretty clearly bad,
Right.
but then you still get people who defend that. So, okay, even if someone can find good things to say about the Nazis, they should be able to find good things to say about just about any other group who is
Right.
truly not as bent on doing evil as they were.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, it does come down to who you are as a person and who you are as a nation and how you're raised. And honestly, we're just continuing concentrating on ourselves, because that's the only thing we can do.
Right.
So, Rabbi Caleb Fischer, thank you so much for joining me. You're always welcome to come on a podcast and share whatever you want to share.
Of course.
It's always an honor. Thank you so much. It was very informative. Um, if you know, hopefully we can all overcome this, and I know we will, because if God brought us together, and he wouldn't bring us together if he wanted to break us apart. So
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me. I hope
thank
I can
you.
be helpful in the future.
Of course. No, of course. Thank you so much. Take care, Rabbi.
I thank you. Bye.